the core purpose really of having to join Dynamics. One is manage business operations. We have said it, automate finance processes, improve operational efficiency, maintain regulatory compliance, gain real-time business insights, and scale globally with multi-entity support. Just like we have said, these are the how D365 support businesses. It helps them to manage their business operations. So you have to understand why or how the system supports the business so that that forms part of understanding of the system. Two, it automates finance processes. So things like month-end activities, bank reconciliations, and the rest of them. Three, it improves operational efficiency through automation, through robust reporting and the likes. Maintain regulatory compliance. One of the very important use of the system is to make sure we're complying with taxes and financial regulations across and operational regulations, and of course gain real-time business insights. That's one of the real purpose for this. Now, let's look at District 5 key strategic objectives very fast. One is unified disconnected system. What that means is it replaces siloed departments. So if you have one of the key strategic objectives why we need to implement D365 is where you have a unified disconnected system within a business. One of why and this justifies why D365 is being implemented by organizations because it's used to replace those silo departments with a single integrated system where finance, manufacturing, supply chain teams, share what we call this real-time data. So it's meant to create that synergy among key departments. Two is data-driven decisions. And of course, for data for now is the gold in this 21st century. The more you can gain value from your data, the more you have competitive edge, right? And the way you can gain value out of data now is by leveraging AI-powered insights, and of course the Microsoft Power BI integration and other Microsoft products functionality provides leaders, with real-time visibility needed for fast, accurate decision making. So that's a very key strategic objectives for implementing D365. Three is to automate manual processes. So one of the key things you will discover when you get into Dynamics and when you start having conversations, when you find yourself in a role, is continuous improvement, business process improvement. And one of the way we can improve business processes is to identify those processes that create that makes the business that is heavy on manual operations and takes the business a lot of time to be able to deliver on those requirements. So one of the key strategies of implementing D365 is to reduce that operational cost and human error that comes with manual processes, and identify another way is to automate repetitive tasks. For example, every month, if you have to send an invoice to a particular vendor with the same amount and the same rate, why not just automate that process, so that it saves you time, and if there are also journal postings you need to make that are recurring. For example, if you do what we call prepayments and you pay in advance according to if you use the Akura concept of account, you're expected to um, you know post that transaction monthly to be able to account for um, you know account for those months that those expenses were incurred. That's a repetitive process. So one of the ways you can improve efficiency is to automate those kind of processes. And of course, you can also set up workflows to be able to manage authorizations and approvals. Hello? Okay. The next is enable, we have said global scalability. If you work in, most times Dynamics is used by global entities that are in different continents and have multiple entities running in different countries. What Dynamics does is to support functions like multi-currency, which is a big deal when you are doing transactions in different countries, multi-language to be able to translate the system tables and fields and functions and user experience and user interface into specific languages. And of course, complex multi-entity legal structures, there are, when you're implementing, different countries have different requirements on how to set up their legal entities within the system. So it's basically one of his uses to make sure those complex multi-entity legal structures are set up correctly. And of course, ensure compliance with things like global tax and regulatory standards across dozens of countries. We have heard about invoicing again. We have talked, every country has different tax requirements, every country has different reporting requirements. Some countries report their financial statement using GAAP, some countries use IFRS. So it depends. Some countries have local requirements in country where you have to make sure that your financial statement complies with. So all these requirements needs to be considered. And of course, Dynamics has the capacity to scale to accommodate these complexities. And of course, the last or so is optimize operational efficiency. What this means is it provides advanced tools for things like, if you're in the manufacturing sector, demand forecasting is very important, warehouse management, production scheduling. These are key functions that drives efficiency. For example, demand forecasting, it's a very important function that a system should have to help you forecast demand, depending on the kind of manufacturing structure you have. If you're using, for example, make to stock or make to order, you know, let's say make to stock, which is your manufacturing process. One of the ways that helps you produce things that so that you don't go out of stock and you don't also overproduce is demand forecasting. And again, the period when your business makes, when demand in your business goes up and comes down. For example, if you're in the food industry, towards the end of the year, during festive periods, there's more demand on certain products. Demand forecasting helps you forecast that demand well ahead of time. Also, of course, warehouse management and of course how you schedule productions. These are all geared towards, minimizing waste and improving lead time so that you don't overproduce and you don't underproduce and you don't oversupply and you can manage your raw materials effectively. So this is really one of the ways or strategy objectives of implementing basically D365. Do we have any questions? Let me see. The questions. If you have questions, you can raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Go ahead, today.
I just wanted to understand the part of automating, some of the processes. Let's say with account receivable, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
They always receive invoices from suppliers. It comes into
Yes.
the system. The manual
Mm-hmm.
way to do it is you send it and it goes into a certain email box, and then somebody unwraps it and creates an invoice journal. So by saying automating, is there a situation whereby this can be sent and it goes directly into D365, you unwraps it and it creates the invoice journal itself? Like, is the system
Yes.
built that way? Is it robust enough? And can it even do
Yes.
things like manual checks? Like, for example, in my organization, I know we have manual workarounds whereby once we get an invoice, we now have to match it against a purchase order, right?
Mm. Two-way,
So
three-way,
somebody has to
four-way
check.
check.
Yeah, sorry? Hmm?
Two-way, three-way, four-way check.
Yes. So can we set up the system in such a way that it can do that? Is the system, I suppose the question is, again, without getting too
I
technical,
understand.
Yeah.
I
It's
understand
like,
your question.
do we have to do some sort of integration, or is D365 built in such a way that it can handle all of that? You just have to set up all the automated functions. Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends. Yeah, and yes, you can automate certain processes. For example, we talked about production planning, right, or demand forecasting.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example. If you're running MRP, material requisition planning, and you put a minimum stock level on the system, now what happens is when you're running your production and that particular stock gets to that level, you can automate it such that the system can immediately raise a PO without your help. It will raise a PO, it will send that PO to a vendor to supply that material that has reduced in quantity. And what you will see is that the vendor will receive a PO and the vendor will supply that material to your warehouse.
Mm.
Yes. So it's you can automate that. You don't have to, manually do that. When it's low, procurement will start shouting. Procurement will go and raise this thing, take it to store will raise requisition, take it to procurement. When we raise another department, take it to finance. No, 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 no. Immediately the system automates that process and just sends a PO straight to the vendor and the PO supplies. There's also automation around bank reconciliation, where at the end of every month, there's a requirement to make sure that your bank ledgers are the same with your physical bank statement. Manually doing that can be very time consuming.
That's very
So
taxing.
what companies do now, yeah, is to automatically import your bank statements into the system. The system will match your bank transactions end to end, transaction to transaction in your ledgers, and do automatic bank reconciliation. Anyone it doesn't match, then you have to investigate and manually close those ones out. So
Mm.
there are different examples. It depends. And I think you talked about two-way, three-way match. It's also a key standard functionality in the system where before the system pays any vendor, it will check for price, quantity, and amount. Price, quantity, majorly. And of course, yeah, at the end of the day, it checks for amount. So the idea is that, you know, before you pay, what you're paying for should match. So the system does a two-way or three-way match. So it matches PO, it matches purchase requisition and PO. The three-way match is to check purchase equation, PO, and the invoice to make sure that the quantity and the price that has been stated in those documents are correct. If there is an issue with the match, it will not release that invoice for payment. It will
Mm.
trigger a workflow to say go and check. Maybe price changed as the document was moving from one page to another, and that price change was not approved, so it will hold it.
Okay.
So these
So
are
I suppose my question is, sorry that we're digressing a little bit. So everything that is needed to automate such a process, do we have it in D365, or we have to think
yes.
about integrating some sort of,
No, 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 no,
using
no, no,
integrated
no, no.
tools?
No, no, no. So again, it depends, right? Sometimes you might have to do some development. Sometimes you might have to maybe get another system, but it depends on what the requirement is. So that's why you do fit to standard workshops. When those requirements come from the business, you have to now leverage on best practice. So go into the system, check what the functionality is in the system, whether that system can function, whether that the system can deliver on that function. For example, you're doing invoicing. Invoicing is part of a standard functionality in D365. But why is your company using an ISV? That's one big question you should ask. So before they decided to use a third party, they had checked the standard functionality of invoicing in the system and discovered maybe it's not robust enough to manage the kind of things they want it done. And maybe they don't have the resource in the business to manage that bit of work. Do you understand what I'm saying? So at the
Mm.
end of the day, it depends on what the requirement is and what the system can deliver. So that's where knowledge of the system and its best practice, its functions also come into play. And once that gap is there, a gap analysis needs to be done. Then a justification for if we're not using the standard functionality, what options do we have? And that will lead to integrations at the end of the day. So again, it just depends on what the requirement is.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, Tunde, go ahead. 1 minute so we can move on.
So I think maybe I get what you're saying, but maybe what is trying to say from what I hear him say is okay. You mentioned there are some standard processes in D365, but based on the
Yes.
business requirement, if they require additional processes. Does D365 has those additional? Maybe you can now pay additionally, or probably you might need to do an API to integrate other platforms to be able to do that. That's one.
Yeah.
Secondly, we were explaining the issue of the system being able to send a PO to this vendor. Is the
Mm.
system able to check because of pricing? What procurement will have done is to check which of the vendor can supply quality and at the best possible price. Is the system being able to do that? Not just raising PO and then and sending to any
That's
vendor.
Yeah, of course. You should have done that setting in the system first. So you should have identified the vendor that can deliver the right quantity and the right price. You maintain that in the
Okay.
system. It's not the system that will maintain that for you. What the system
Okay.
knows is when it gets to that quantity and it needs to reorder, it will reorder. Then, if the vendor gets the PO and the price has changed, he will communicate back to the business and they will probably do some adjustments. But yeah, but at the end
Okay.
of the day,
The work
yeah,
around.
yeah, there's a manual workaround if there's a need to make changes.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So briefly,